So chapter 5, there we go, early societies in East Asia. Well, we have early humans migrating through Eastern Asia, right? During the Paleolithic era, gatherers and hunters, 200,000 years ago. That's a nice, neat slice of time that anthropologists and archaeologists and prehistorians set for the evolution of Homo sapiens sapien. Some of those people will make the transition to the Neolithic era about 9,000 years ago, okay, with rice in the south and grain, millet in the north. Settlements will grow along rivers from the Yellow to the Yangtze. The Yellow River, really called the Huanghe, in the north, where it's colder. It's actually a climate not unlike Western New York in some respects, maybe less snow, but actually drier and colder. I think one of the coldest days I've ever spent in my life was a New Year's Day in Beijing. Anyway, northern China, along the Yangtze River to the south, it's wetter and warmer rice farming. Okay? Instead of irrigating the soil, we are told through early Chinese myths, stories, that rulers had to get the people to dam up the rivers to stop them from flooding, or also to actually to figure out how to control flooding. It's not just to dam up, that just makes the flood harsher somewhere else. It's actually to create spillways. So when the river goes over the banks, you want to direct where it flows into kind of almost like a maze or a grid pattern of the low-lying area. So that floods instead of your towns, your earthen, your home's made out of ramped earth, packed dirt. Okay? So we have these stories of these mythic sage kings, these wise men. Service to the state is what gets you fame in early China, because the Yellow River especially was prone to flooding. The Huanghe, sometimes called China's sorrow, China's sadness. And again, the group effort was needed to control the flooding rather than to bring the water to the fields. Right? Neolithic communities, I'm just reading off my own notes here, 7,000 years ago, that will, as we've seen elsewhere, and without connection, as far as we know, it's really unlikely that the people of the Yellow River would have known anything about Mesopotamia. Unlikely, perhaps not impossible. But this farming is an independent invention, and with it we see the growth in population, the growth in complexity. Knowledge becomes very valuable, and there's a need ultimately for writing. Okay? So the Chinese are going to make that breakthrough to civilization. It's a bit contested. I was in China a number of years ago, and people in really southwestern China said they had the first civilization. People in northern China said no, it was they. So it's hard to say. Really, in my opinion, it doesn't matter who was first. Okay, these are largely independent developments of cities and organization and writing. Okay? The first dynasty, the first family of rulers that we know anything about, and it's only from oral tradition, it gets written down later, was the Xia dynasty, Xia. When? Well, 4,200 years ago, all right? It will last for about 300 years. It's actually one of several. We say states in history when we really mean countries. Sorry, I know the vocabulary is a little bit different, but it's nation states. More recent archaeological discoveries have been made. I was talking about in southwestern China, the Shu, S-H-U civilization. Flood control was used by the Xia dynasty in bronze weapons. So bronze, an alloy of tin and copper, and metallurgy is off right at the moment. Okay, a harder, more durable, and potentially sharper weapon. Metal that could be used for weapons, and the wealthy use it to adorn their chariots and their horses, while the poor people actually had to scratch the earth with sticks. It would have been better, of course, had the plows been made out of a bronze, at least prow, right, the cutting part in the front. Similar to our Egyptian story, giving you dynasty after dynasty after dynasty, but really with China, those dynasties stack up until the 20th century, really until 1911, the final dynasty. All right, so China's history can be at least organized by dynasty, chronologically. Dynasty, family of rulers. Okay? Sometimes they weren't even Chinese. They weren't Han Chinese. They were from outside until 1911. So a very interesting, long tradition. Shang Dynasty, this one's very long, so it's going to be the Shang family. How do we know? We actually have writing. There might have been writing under the Zhao, but if people were writing on bamboo strips or other organic media, not really paper yet, but let's say strips of wood, that stuff's going to rot away. Okay? With the Shang, we get records that are written in bone and tortoise shells, and we think that's actually how writing was invented. More about that in a moment. Well, no, more about that at this moment. Sorry, just read my notes. So we think, this is a theory, but I think there's a lot of evidence to back it up, that the rulers want to know what's going to happen next, right? Right now, like the Republicans, Democrats are doing all this polling, like, hey, how are you going to vote? I hate to tell them it's pretty much set in stone. I don't think anyone's going to change their mind, okay? For the last almost 4 years, you've had, well, actually for more than 4 years, you've had media saturation of Trump. You either like him or you don't, okay? I mean, what's going to change your mind, right? You either think we need to change direction or not. So, but nonetheless, people who make money on polling want to poll and ask, that maybe 3% of the people who are somehow still on the fence, right? So tell the future. Well, likewise, so to speak, the Shang and probably all rulers want to know what's going to happen next. They didn't do polling in ancient China. They brought in the priests, and they brought in a big scapular blade of an oxen. They carved symbols into it. They took a bronze pointer, right? Heated up, put it in a hole they drilled. This gets pretty elaborate. Hole they drilled in that shoulder blade of a cow or a tortoiseshell, and is there going to be war next year? And it would crack, and if it kind of cracked through the yes or the no or the war symbol or whatever symbols they had, it would supposedly foretell the future. That's called oracle divination. Not only in China, but oracle divination to divine the future is fairly common in many cultures. Okay, I don't know. It's been a long time since we've had a Ouija board in the United States, at least in the popular, teenager games. They play games on the internet now, I guess, but old board games of Ouija's. So there's an increased use of bronze. I mentioned the elites, the wealthy, the landlords monopolize it, while the poor people live in holes in the ground. Okay, so dig basically a pit and put a thatch roof under it, and that's your home. Okay, so poor people lived very poorly. Cities were made out of pounded earth. You kind of did this when your kid went to the beach with sand, like you made it wet and you pushed it together. And no, it's not going to last. Okay, that's why we're talking about bronze and tortoise shells. The cities have eroded over time. Okay? And we can talk about the tombs, because when people were buried, it's actually in the ground. They used a lot of jade with wealthy burials. So jade, kind of a precious stone, usually green, but it can take other colors. It was seen to have some type of magical properties, maybe even to preserve the body. No, it didn't, but it kind of looks cool when you find someone buried in a suit made out of pieces of jade all sewn together. There's no more body in it, but the jade suit looks pretty cool. Bury rich people with bronze, while the poor people just scratch the earth with a stick as their plow. The Shang were replaced by another, even longer-lived dynasty, the Zhao. So the Zhao family, we're in charge now. Really? How come you're in charge? Because the Shang were no good. Heaven, Tian, the great spirit, kind of sort of God, gave us permission to get rid of the Shang. They were lazy bums, and China had problems. There was famine, or there was war, whatever the problem was, I don't recall. And now we, the Zhao, are going to fix the problems. So Chinese history is often cyclical. A dynasty will rise, do good things, at least in their own mind, and then fall apart. And then another family of rulers, and then another family of rulers. You kind of, really, in a sense, get that into, as I said, the early 20th century. Under the Zhao, China grows, but here's the problem, right? There's no Twitter, thank God for them, right? I mean, how does a ruler control a vast territory? There are no drones, there's no internet, there's no really even postal system. I have an idea. If I'm the ruler, if I'm John Zhao, King Shao, I trust you people. I'm going to put each of you in charge of a piece of my kingdom. And you're afraid of me, right? This is decentralized. For whatever reason, you'd be afraid of me. Just pretend. But your children are not going to listen to mine. Your grandsons are not going to listen to my grandson. Your great-great-grandsons, blah, blah, blah. This thing starts to come apart as a puzzle. Okay? So decentralized rule becomes increasingly decentralized over time. For a while, you can hold it together by alliances. Hey, promise to be loyal to me, and I'll marry my daughter to your son, that type of thing. But increasingly, the puzzle's going to come apart, and China will be embroiled in civil war. In the United States, right, in 1861, 1865, it's 11 states against the others. Here it's like every state against every other state. Okay. So the Warring States period. And by the way, this one in China will last for about 200 years. State versus state versus state versus... Look, it goes on again, off again. States, I mean, pieces of China fought their neighbors. Oddly enough, this was a time of philosophical flowering, okay? When things were breaking down, really smart people, look, because of the patriarchal society at the time, the privilege men had, they were men, okay? As far as I know, they were all men, okay? And the three most famous founded the schools of Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism. That's in another chapter. It's one reason why this chapter is fairly short. They saved that really interesting stuff for a future chapter. So, what goes on before China falls apart, I guess you want to say, because this was a long period of rule under the Zhao. Classes form, rich and poor, the nobles are using bronze and jade, there are artisans making the bronze and jade and pottery, not the exquisite porcelain we're familiar with, or even the silk yet, but other things you need in a society. Okay? Just the ceramic pottery and the walls around your cities. Peasants were drafted by the state. Get out there and dig some flood control. Okay? We're very poor. Gradually, they're going to begin to use iron tools, which made at least the work a little easier, probably not their lives that much easier. Right? Prisoners of war could be enslaved. So we see early slavery, but this was not based upon ethnicity or skin tone. Rarely were slaves for lives. Probably never was the child of a slave enslaved because his father and mother were. So it's not based upon race, as we unfortunately will see later in the Americas. We do see in China at this time family becomes a central institution, and it's extended. It's mom, it's dad, it's the kids, it's grandma, it's grandpa, if they live long enough, it's aunts and uncles, okay, in-laws, as more of a clan. And that might even extend beyond generations, because early Chinese religion honored one's ancestors. There's no like set written Bible or Quran, right? This is religion of the hearth and home. The father of the family is going to do prayers to Tian, the Great Spirit, but beyond this world is this Great Spirit that's kind of amorphous and vague. Between Tian, T-I-E-N is the way we would transliterate it, and little old me or you, we have the spirits of the deceased. Okay? So there's a lot of veneration, honoring of ancestors, and actually even respect for elderly people who are still alive. Of course, they'd be still alive if they're elderly people. Society became increasingly patriarchal. It's hard to know exactly why. Right? The men began to dominate. Probably because of war. Okay, one theory that I tend to buy into is if a woman is of child-rearing years, if a woman is pregnant, if a woman is nursing a baby, that woman, it's very difficult, not impossible, but it would be very difficult for that woman to go off and fight in a war. Okay? So men started to take over war, at least in most societies, and at the end of the war, the men held on to what they gained, which was power. Okay? So there's a really, really brief gender theory there, patriarchy. What about religion? Well, I said this, Tian is assistant god. It's not organized, they're myths, and Chinese writing develops as the government attempts to ask Tian, the Great Spirit, what's going to happen in the future. This image, not very good, but from your book, is a shoulder blade with symbols carved in it. Those symbols, they morph over time, but those are the symbols of the Chinese language today, and they form the basis of the Korean and the Japanese alphabet as well. They're ideographic. Each symbol is almost an icon. Each symbol is a word. Each symbol is an idea. It's not a phonetic alphabet as we have in English. Remember the Phoenicians, their symbols represented sounds. In China, the symbols represent ideas. which means what? One character can represent a lot of, a big idea, but also means you need a lot of characters. Right? So there's a trade-off. I'm not saying one's better than another, but to be highly literate in Chinese, you need to know about 8,000 characters. You guys need to learn 26, so stop complaining, okay? All right, evolved to thousands of characters today. I know I'm rushing this a little bit, guys. I do want to get this in one segment, because I know you're busy, hopefully you're busy reviewing your notes and even the textbook. Somebody emailed me and said, I'm rereading all the chapters. I would recommend writing in the margins. I know that devalues the book when you want to sell it, but write in the margins or take notes from the book, and the notes from the book and the notes from these lectures should do this. We call it dovetailing. Because I'm following the same stuff in the same order. Just in a more entertaining way, of course. Right? China's remote but not isolated. There is trade and migration, especially by nomadic peoples. People on, especially horseback, people raising livestock on the steppes, the rolling hills of Asia, especially northern Asia, are in contact. They're the ones that actually bring iron technology into China from beyond. Steppes. So that, notice how steppe is spelled weirdly. 2 P's and an E. So we're not talking about staircase. The land was not shaped like a staircase. It's rolling hills, few trees, a lot of grass. You can't farm it, it's too dry. But you can live off the animals, unless you're vegan, which nobody probably was. You can live off the animals that eat the grass. Okay? So these are migratory people who bring in new ideas, like horses and bronze and iron, to China. Bronze must have been very early, though. Chinese society is going to expand, especially southward into the Yangtze, where there's rice cultivation. And by the year 221, which would have been what? 441 years ago, China's become quite large, but by that time, we are right at the conclusion of the Warring States era. Okay? Now, they didn't have 50 states, okay? But state after state after state after state, and they're fighting one another on and off for 200 years. During this period, we do see the rise of Chinese philosophies, the major ones, although there's hundreds of them supposedly. The big ones will be legalism, might makes right, Taoism, retreat from society and flow in harmony with nature. In Confucianism, let's create a polite society based upon proper relationships. Wow, there's a whole lot more to each one of those, and we'll do them in a future chapter. But for now, I just want to note the QIN, okay?